तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्। भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्।
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथ,
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथ,
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथ,
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथ,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथा,
मंगलदायक हे गणनाथा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
हे शिवनंदन पाहि दयाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
पर्तिपुरीश्वर जगत परिपाला,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा विघ्न विनाशा,
प्रणव स्वरूपा स्वरूपा विघ्नविनाशा
प्रणवस्वरूपा विघ्नविनाशा
मङ्गलदायक हे गणनाथा गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
हे परमेश्वर नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
ओंकाराय नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
पर्तिपुरीश्वर नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
जगदीश्वराय नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
प्रशान्तीश्वर नमो नमो
गुरुदेवाय नमो नमो सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
मन्दहासमुख शशिवदनी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
चन्दनकुङ्कुम अलङ्कृतवदनी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
साई महेश्वरी राजराजेश्वरी
ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ
शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति
ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति ॐ शक्ति सुन्दरवदनी सुगुणमनोहरी साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
पार करो मेरे जीवन नैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
तुम हो मेरे माँ बाप भैया
मेरे माँ बाप भैया
तुम हो मेरे माँ बाप भैया
हो मेरे माँ बाप भैया
हृदय निवासी कृष्ण कृष्ण कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी कृष्ण कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी कृष्ण कन्हैया हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
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 साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
तुम हो मेरे माँ बाप भैया
हो मेरे माँ बाप भैया
हृदय निवासी कृष्ण कन्हैया
कृष्ण कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
हृदय निवासी साई कन्हैया
पार करो मेरी जीवन नैया
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 साई कन्हैया साई कन्हैया मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
रामा राघवा राजीवलोचना
रामा राघवा राजीवलोचना
रामा राघवा राजीवलोचना
रामा राघवा राजीवलोचना
मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
मैथिलीपते रघुनन्दना
दीनावना करुणामया
दीनावना करुणामया
दीनावना करुणामया
दीनावना करुणामया
कमल
सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी मात महेश्वरी दुर्गा भवानी माता महेश्वरी दुर्गा भवानी सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी अखिलांडेश्वरी जय जगज्जननी अखिलांडेश्वरी जय जगज्जननी अभय प्रदायिनी आनंद रूपिणी अभय प्रदायिनी आनंद रूपिणी मंगलकारिणी मोक्ष प्रदायिनी मंगलकारिणी मोक्ष प्रदायिनी सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी माता महेश्वरी दुर्गा भवानी सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी अखिलांडेश्वरी जय जगज्जननी अभय प्रदायिनी आनंद रूपिणी मंगलकारिणी मोक्ष प्रदायिनी मंगलकारिणी मोक्ष प्रदायिनी सिंहवाहिनी साई नारायणी युग युग के अवतार तुम्ही हो 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 मेरे राम मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा मेरे राम मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम,
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम,
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम।
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान,
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान।
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान।
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम शिरडी साई पर तेरा।
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 जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
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 युग युग के अवतार तुम्ही हो।
युग युग के अवतार तुम्ही हो।
मेरे राम मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा।
मेरे राम मेरे श्याम शिरडी साई पर तेरा।
जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम,
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम।
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान।
सबको सन्मति दो भगवान।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम शिरडी साई पर तेरा।
अल्लाह ईश्वर तेरे नाम शिरडी साई पर तेरा।
जग के पालनहार तुम्ही हो।
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 युग युग के अवतार तुम्ही हो। कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगीश्वराय नमो।
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगीश्वराय नमो।
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगीश्वराय नमो।
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगीश्वराय नमो।
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय।
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय।
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय।
साईश्वराय नमो।
साईश्वराय नमो।
सत्य साईश्वराय नमो।
सत्य साईश्वराय नमो।
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः।
नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो।
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः।
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमो
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगेश्वराय नमो
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगेश्वराय नमो
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय
जगद्धिताय विश्वरूपाय
साईश्वराय नमो
साईश्वराय नमो
ॐ नमः शिवाय शिवाय 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 नमो
कालातीताय सिद्धिरूपाय योगीश्वराय नमो
भज गोविन्दं भज गोविन्दम् गोविन्दं भज मूढमते गोविन्दं भज मूढमते भज गोविन्दं भज गोविन्दम् गोविन्दं भज मूढमते सम्प्राप्ते सन्निहिते काले सम्प्राप्ते सन्निहिते काले नहि नहि रक्षति दुःखकरणे नहि नहि रक्षति दुःखकरणे पुनरपि जननं पुनरपि मरणम् पुनरपि जननं पुनरपि मरणम् पुनरपि जननी जठरे शयनम् पुनरपि जननी जठरे शयनम् इह संसारे बहुदुस्तारे इह संसारे बहुदुस्तारे इह संसारे बहुदुस्तारे कृपया पारे पाहि मुरारे भज गोविन्दम् भज गोविन्दम् भज मूढमते गोविन्दं भज मूढमते भज गोविन्दं भज मूढमते.
The topic that we chose, I think, for today was lessons at the lotus feet. I did not say lessons learnt at the lotus feet because I cannot claim that I have learnt anything much. I've certainly heard a lot of wonderful lessons that Swami has given. How much of it that I'm able to practice is a journey in itself. Each one of us, I think, when we have seen Swami or heard Swami, we all have a resolution that we want to practice certain things in our lives. But the spiritual journey is a long one and a slow one. And the effort that we put in is up to each one of us. So one of the things that I very early in my life, thank you very much, by the way, Sister Kirti, for your introduction. Nice of you to have read out a long introduction, but thank you so much for that. But one of the early things that I heard and listened and watched my own elders while serving Swami was one of the wonderful aspects of divinity, which is omnipresence. I realized at a very young age that Swami seemed to know everything that we did, not only everything we did, everything we said, and not only everything we said, but everything that we thought in our minds as well. I was very fortunate, as Sister read out the introduction, I was very fortunate to have come into Swami's fold at birth. My grand uncle, Sheshagiri Rao, who was the elder brother of my own grandfather, he was my father's uncle, came to Swami in 1943. So ever since then, my father's side especially, my father's side of the family became devotees. And by the time my father got married, he was already a devotee of Swami. And then my mother, in her own way, had seen Swami as a young girl in Bangalore. And she was told by Swami, who was a young boy at that time, that she would soon be getting married to a dental surgeon and that he would see her in Puttaparthi. So my parents, in fact, as soon as they got married, realized that they had both seen Swami, and their life journey started in 1945 when they got married together, as Swami being the very core of their life. So from there, by the time my brother was born and I came into this world, they were very deeply rooted in devotion to Swami. And because of that, I was very, very fortunate to hear stories from my aunts and my cousins and my uncles, stories that were wonderful. If you have all read the Satyam Shivam Sundaram, you will know that was the time of the Mahima period of Swami. So they had wonderful experiences that they used to share with us as children. Just like all of us, many of us Hindus have grown up listening to the Ramayana or the Bhagavatam. I grew up listening to Swami stories as a small child. But the only difference was that these stories were very real to me because I saw Swami every weekend in Vrindavan or in Puttaparthi during the times that we went to Navaratri and other festivals at that time. This was the Bhagwan who was walking amidst us, who would show all these wonderful, wonderful experiences, not only to my family members, but even to us as children. So very early in my life, I learned that Swami could read our thoughts, knew our mind, knew what we were doing at all times. So when he said that I am always with you, don't worry, intane, kantane, gentane, ventane, eppudu untunnanu, I am always with you, besides you. These were not just words that one heard, but these were very, very true for me at the time, because he would read our minds and joke with us and knew exactly what we were doing at all times. So one of the wonderful experiences that continued to happen in my own life was when he was able to tell me what exactly I was doing at all times. And this was one of the things that I really heard in Swami's presence. The other thing that was very, very clear to me, that he would respond when we called out to him intensely. Now, one of the questions that I get a lot wherever I speak, whether it is on Zoom or whether it is in person when I attend regional retreats, they will always say, why do we feel that Swami doesn't respond to us? You know, we do our bhajans, we do our prayers, but many times we feel that Swami is not responding to us. And I was very fortunate. I think I was able to ask Swami once or twice in my many times that when we used to go from the US to India. We came to the US when my children were 5 years old. So we were able to go back, and Swami was very, very kind, and he would always talk to my children. And I think one of the questions even my children had is, why do we feel that Swami doesn't hear us sometimes, Swami? We are so far away. We want to come near you. We want to be here in Prashanti Nilayam so that you can hear us when we call out to you. Somehow the geographical distance meant to them that he could not hear across the Atlantic Ocean. So that was one of the things too. At an early age, I realized that the intensity of our feelings for him was the most important thing, and how we develop a relationship with him. So a beautiful example that Swami gave at that time is, he said that, you know, if you just call out something because you know a name, then the response may not be as simple. But if you develop a relationship with me, develop love for God, you will then feel the response in many ways. So that was one of the things. I'm just going over a couple of things that I have been thinking this morning. And that was one of the things, is how intensely we think of him and with what relationship that we develop towards him. The other thing was that the name was very, very powerful. The name that we call out, it doesn't matter which name. It could be a name from any religion. You can say Jesus, you can say Allah, you can say Rama, Krishna, it doesn't matter. But it is the intensity and the faith with which you call out the name, which is important. And in fact, I was thinking of a funny thing while I was thinking these thoughts this morning, that Swami actually gave a very funny but beautiful example to my children. In the year 2000, I think my children were by that time 17, or they were born in 81. So they were 17 or 18 years old. And we used to go to Prashanti Nilayam, and Swami, with his infinite love and kindness, would speak to us several times during our visit to Bangalore, to Parthi. And on that one, and every time we went there, on the ladies' side, all of you are very familiar, I'm sure, with the Prashanti Nilayam. On the ladies' side, my mother and I would sit down where Swami would enter from the gate. And my father and my husband, Mohan Ram, would sit in the veranda. But my sons, who were young guys, and throughout their childhood, even when we went, they would have to sit in the general public, in the crowd. They would have to go in the token line and sit down wherever they got. So we would be, my husband and my father would be in the veranda. My mother and I would be in probably the first or second or third row where Swami entered. But my children would be somewhere in the crowd. So every time Swami would call us for an interview, we would get up, or he would call on my husband or my father on the men's side, and they would get up in the veranda and indicate to us to go to the interview room. But my sons would be in the public. So we had to figure out where they were. And we would constantly instruct them, keep your eyes alert on us. If you see me and my mother, grandmother get up, because from the men's side, they could see us. They couldn't see the veranda where my husband was. If you see us get up, it means that Swami has called us. Make sure you come, like any mother, which gives instructions in the fear that the child will lose the opportunity of seeing Swami at close quarters. I would constantly tell them that, make sure you're watching us. Don't be distracted, because you won't have too much time. If they call us, make sure you... And every time we were called, it would be a big hurdle for my children to come, because the Seva Dal would not believe that these two young fellows, 12 years, 13 years old, would suddenly get up in the crowd and start walking towards the veranda. And they would say, sit down, sit down, sit down. And they would say, no, my mother is being called. They could not see the ladies' side. So we would always have this complication. We would arrive near the interview room door. Swami would finish his darshan and he would come there and say, where are the children? That would be his first question. And we would say they are still negotiating their way from the public to come to the veranda. And many times Swami would call the four of us into the interview room, and he would very patiently sit on the chair waiting for Arun and Varun to show up. But it would, sometimes they would come, sometimes they wouldn't be allowed. If they crossed the first level of security, which was the public group, when they arrived at the veranda, they would be asked to go back. So Swami would patiently get up and go back in the veranda. And he would bring them both along with him. He would go out of the interview room and bring. So this was like a constant fear as a mother for me, that somehow there would be a day that I would be in the interview room and my children would miss out on seeing Swami. And I remember that intensely, as soon as Swami would say, go into the interview room, rather than be happy about going and the fact that I had been given the opportunity to talk to the divine, my intense Namasmarana would begin. Please, Swami, get Arun and Varun. Please, Swami, get Arun and Varun. That would be my chanting. So one particular year, in the year 2000, by this time they were 17 or 18 years old, we all went into the interview room, and as usual, my two sons had not come. They had been stopped somewhere in the middle. And they were there, and Swami came inside the room and said, where are Arun and Varun? Where are Arun and Varun? And I said, Swami. He said, why have you not taught them to explain to the Sevadal people that Swami has called them Swami? I have taught them Swami, but sometimes, they don't allow them because they are not very sure. So Swami said, you wait. And he went out. And he walked all the way back to the public where these boys had been stopped, and brought them back inside. And both of them were almost in tears because they thought that Swami had closed the interview room door and they would not be allowed. So when we sat down, Swami generally talked to everybody in the interview room. And then he said, why did you boys not explain to the Sevadal who you were? So they said, Swami, we did. And, we have all learned from the very beginning that Swami does not like us to complain about others. We have to pray to Swami. That is the easiest thing, rather than complain about the office bearers or complain about the Sevadal. So my sons knew that would not be very well received by Swami if they complained. So they said, Swami, we did tell them that Swami has called us. So Swami joked and said, did you tell your Pravaram? He said. So these boys did not know, having grown up in the US, even though Swami has performed their Upanayanam, they did not know that Pravaram means they have to tell their ancestry to whoever it was. So they said, we don't know what is that, Swami. So Swami said, did you not tell them that I am Sheshagiri Rao's great grandson? I am Dr. Padmanabhan's grandson. I am Geeta and Mohan Ram's son. I am Arun. I am Varun. And so, did you not tell your Pravaram to the Seva that? So they said, no, Swami, we did not. So then he said, did you at least call my name? So Swami said, yes, Swami, we kept on saying Sai Ram to you. So Swami said, see, that is why I came. So the explanation that Swami started to give them is, it doesn't matter what ancestry you may claim to have, but the intensity of calling my name brought me back all the way in the crowd to bring you back. And he started to tell the story of my grand uncle Sheshagiri Rao, who served Swami. He went to Swami in 1944. He saw Swami, and that was it for him in end of 1943-44. Whatever it was in those days, as you can imagine, there were no books to read, no videos to see, no Zoom calls. There was nothing at all in the Prashanti Nilayam, in the Puttaparthi area in those days. So even though he was from Bangalore, he was still in service, I think, at that point. He went to Puttaparthi. Swami decided that this is a man that I want to have near me. And he stayed back in Puttaparthi and never returned. He was an orthodox man who had gone, not very sure that he wanted to believe in some 16, 17-year-old boy. But he went there, he saw Swami, and that was it for him. He stayed back. So he served Swami till 1968 as Swami's personal attendant. And of course, when the Prashanti Nilayam building was built in 1950, Swami asked him to become the priest there, to do the prayers there in the morning and do the arati. Till he passed away, he used to do the arati to Swami on both times of the day after Bhajans, and generally looked after Swami in every way as his personal attendant till he passed away. So he was a very devout man, and he stayed with Swami, and deep love and devotion for Swami. He used to look after Swami with a lot of love and care. So Swami started to tell my boys about their great-grandfather, as he called him. He said, see, your Muttata, your great-grandfather, he used to be with me all the time. And he used to take care of me and everything. And he started to talk about my grand-uncle in a very, very loving way. You know, he was such a devoted man. He had no other thought other than to serve Swami. That's all he did from morning till night. That's all he would think. Oh, Swami will go to the press. Is the road nice? Is the pathway nice and clean? Are there stones there? Will Swami step on the stones? If Swami walks up to the Sanatana Sarathi office, which used to be there in the old days near the general hospital, which is there now, he says, it will be very hot. Let me carry water. So in a little steel, silver, this thing he used to carry water. That's all. He's constantly, he would do nothing but Namasmarana in various ways. So he said, one day, I was invited to go to Chennai. So this is the reason why I'm giving you this long story, because I'm talking to the Chennai devotees. So Swami was explaining how he had been invited to go to Chennai. He remembered Gindi, Lilamma. He said there are many great devotees there in Chennai. They are very devout people. And I have to go there to Chennai. So in those days, he said, he was explaining to my son, Swami had a small Morris Minor car. And he even told the children, you know, the car was a black Morris Minor car. And I used to have sometimes somebody to drive from the Venkatgiri Raja's family. But in that particular visit, there was no driver. So I decided to drive the car myself to Chennai. And he said that he told the Chennai people that I will leave Prashanti Nilayam in the morning after breakfast, but I will be there for lunch. Of course, the Chennai devotee said, Swami, how can you be in Chennai for 4.5 hours from Prashanti Nilayam? It is not possible. And Swami said, don't worry, I am coming to such and such a day. He didn't tell us the devotee's name. I'm coming to such and such a devotee's house for lunch. You all be prepared for lunch. So they went away after inviting him, and he told Sheshagiri Rao, Sheshgiri Rao, you'll be ready on such and such a day, morning 8:30 a.m. after morning breakfast, we believe. So it was just Swami and my tata, my grandfather, who were leaving. So they started to drive. Swami said he drove a little slowly, and Sheshgiri Rao was sitting in the back seat while Swami was driving the car. Then suddenly, Swami said, Sheshgiri Rao, you go to sleep now because we have to reach Chennai very fast because I told them I'm coming for lunch. So poor Sheshgiri Rao, of course, who constantly looked up to Swami, said, no, Swami, how can I sleep when you are here like that? He said, don't worry. And Swami said he started to drive so fast because he wanted to reach Chennai because he had promised that this poor Sheshgiri Rao sitting in the back seat started to see all the trees flying by, the road just going. He could not even see the road. He got so scared at the speed in which the car was going that he put his palms together and he softly first started to say, Sai Rama, Sai Rama, Sai Rama. And Swami was laughing and telling us, Sai Rama is driving the car, but he forgot about the physical form of Sai Rama. But he kept on softly saying Sai Rama. Then as the car speed went on getting faster and faster and faster, the speed of that Sai Rama and the pitch of Sai Rama from the Swami said, Mood Shruti from 3 Shruti of 3, it became to 7.5. Sai Rama, he was just saying Sai Rama with his eyes closed, with such intense devotion that he consistently called out to Sai Rama. And finally, we arrived in Chennai. He opened his eyes and said, have we already reached, Swami? We are in front of the devotee's house. Yes, Sheshgiri Rao. But you were calling my name so intensely. You did not realize that the wheels of the car was not on the road. It was flying. And Swami said that from Bangalore, from Prashanti Nilayam to Chennai, the car just flew with Sheshgiri Rao chanting Sai Rama in the back seat, while Sai Rama himself was driving the car. So he was explaining to the children that the name has such power. Even if you cannot see my form, if you chant my name, the power of my name will make you fly across this journey of life. This journey of life, he said. So this is how you boys, for a few minutes, you say Sai Rama, then you keep quiet and you start worrying about the Sevadal people. Then you will say Sai Rama for 1.5 minutes and then you will think, oh, Swami has forgotten. He's not going to come out. We are stuck here. He's not going to call us for the interview. So he said, remember to have a deep faith and a deep love for that name. Whether you see my physical form or not, it doesn't matter. The name will connect me to you. So that is one of the questions that people ask me. Now that Swami's physical form is not here, how can we develop faith in Swami? How can we have that strong faith? And Swami again, also to the same question that my children asked, he gave a very beautiful answer to that. He said, you know, you have not seen the picture of your great-grandfather, Sheshgiri Rao or Sitaramaya. You have not seen their faces. You have not met them. But the picture of their picture is there in your puja room of your grandparents' house. And your grandparents tell you, this was Sheshgiri Rao, this was Sitaramaya. And you have developed a lot of love and respect for that picture and that name and that particular form. You have developed a relationship. So supposing tomorrow somebody comes to your house and says, who are these two ugly old men? Why are you people hanging these pictures? Do you throw it away? Won't you get angry? You will say, why are you saying that? That is my great-grandfather. He's my great-father. You don't know anybody. He's my grandfather. He's my great-father. It is just a piece of paper. It is just a picture, but you have developed love towards that picture, that frame, that particular face. You have developed love, and you are willing to defend that name and that form, even though you have never met your great-grandfather or seen them or talked to them. In the same way, with God also, as long as you don't worship God as a picture, but you worship the picture as God, it becomes a personal relationship to you. You will develop personal relationship. So this is how, and it doesn't matter by which name you call. You're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're a Hindu. It doesn't matter which name you call. So one of the beautiful incidents that happened to me when I was a young girl. Some of you may have heard about it. I don't know. But I think it is a good incident or experience of mine that it is good to talk about. Is because many times we think, okay, do we have to worship him in this particular form? I have a lot of love for Rama's form or Krishna's form. Does it matter? And it really doesn't matter. We all repeat the Ashtotra so many times. We call him by so many names. But the idea is to call him with love, So that was so this particular incident happened when I was a small girl. I used to study in an American Protestant school in Bangalore called Baldwin Girls High School in Bangalore. And there I had a teacher who was my third grade teacher, Mrs. Grant. She was a devout, she was a Christian, and she was a very good teacher. I remember her very well even now, even after so many years. That is the wonderful thing about teachers. They can really impact your life. So Mrs. Grant, one day when I was in school, gave me a little note and said, my father was quite a well-known dental surgeon in Bangalore, and she had some tooth issue. And she said, can you ask your father if he can see me as his patient any evening after school, because the school was there till 3:30. So I asked, and of course my father said, of course, you bring her along with you. I used to come home by bus in those days. And he said, you bring her with you after school and I will see her. So so I brought Mrs. Grant one day. She was a very nice, she had met my parents before in parent-teachers meetings and so on. So my father finished treating her. I was waiting outside in the waiting room of my dad's dental practice. And as she was coming out, she was generally just talking to my father. My father was very good with his patients. And she happened to tell my father she was going through a very difficult time. Her husband apparently had been diagnosed with tuberculosis. So she was just asking my father if he knew of any doctors that he could recommend, and this is what had happened to her husband. And as my father was listening to her, I was a young girl, I was a third grader, and I suddenly piped up saying, oh, you should just take the Vibhuti, Swami's Vibhuti. And she could see that there was a Swami's picture in my father's clinic. And she said, who? And I said, my Swami, Satya Sai Baba, you should just give your husband some vibhuti. I was basically just listening to the conversation between my teacher and my father. You should just give him some vibhuti. So this poor teacher, who was a Christian, was put in a little bit of an awkward position. I think she didn't know what vibhuti was. And of course had not much faith in Swami, not having heard of him in those days, especially in the 60s. Swami was not so very well known in Bangalore. So she said, oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. But I would not let it go. And I was pestering my father to give her some vibhuti. So my father, who was kind of glaring at me, ended up giving her a packet of Swami's vibhuti that he had in his clinic and explained to her that Satya Sai Baba is our spiritual master. And, we have faith in him. If you want, this is the vibhuti that my daughter is talking about. It's holy ash, she explained to her. So this poor lady took it from my father and she went home with it. But I kept on telling her, Mrs. Grant, you make sure you give it to him. You make sure you give it to Mr. Grant because he will get better. And I think I pestered her so much. And the following day as well in school, kept asking her, did you give it? So I think out of her affection and love for me, she did happen to give that vibhuti to her husband for a couple of days. And within a couple of days, the man started to feel better. And she was very surprised because they had told her that it didn't look very good. And it was those days probably when tuberculosis was quite a serious problem and it was not that easy to cure. So he started to get better. And then over a period of time, she continued to give her vibhuti and she was supposed to go for the husband's checkup. And when they took x-rays and everything, found that there was no tuberculosis at all in when they took the x-rays. And the doctors were very shocked because they could clearly see it in the previous x-rays, but seemed like he was completely cured. So she was very, very surprised. And she then happened to tell me that, can you please ask your father if I can visit this Satya Sai Baba, who is... So I came back and asked my parents again, and I said, can my teacher come? I was very excited that my teacher wanted to come and see my Swami in Vrindavan. So my father said, of course. So we told her that my mother talked to her on the phone and said, we will pick you up on the way to Vrindavan. When we went there, on the way we picked her up, but along with her, my fourth grade teacher, who was to be my fourth grade teacher the following year, Mrs. Mercy, she was there, and Mrs. Grant and she were very good friends. And they said that, can we please bring her? We thought we'll bring her along. So the three of us sat in my father's car at the back, my mother in the front. We went to Vrindavan. And as Swami finished his darshan and started to go into the building, my father followed him in there. And he sent word with my father, you bring the two teachers inside. So these two ladies who had no idea what an interview was, we all went along with them. And Swami gave them both an interview with so much of love and spoke to them in English. And he looked at Mrs. Grant and said that, don't worry, there is no more tuberculosis. Your husband is not, he's well now. Jesus has taken care of her. Don't worry, he told her. She was completely floored because she knew that my father probably would not have said anything to Swami. He had just immediately, we had all had darshan together. He had immediately called them. In fact, there was no time or anything for my father to have spoken to Swami. And Swami had called her by her name and said that your husband is well. Don't worry about it. Jesus has taken care of him. And then he looked at Mrs. Mercy and said, Miss Mercy actually, she was not married, and said, how is Jacob? She looked even more taken aback because my father or any of us, none of us knew who Jacob was. And she said, your brother Jacob, who is a pastor in Kerala, she was from Kerala, and he's a pastor in the church. He's a very good man. How is he? Every day he worships in the church. How is he doing? She was a Catholic, and she said, he's doing very well, sir. Both of them addressed Swami as sir. And suddenly, Swami materialized a beautiful crucifix, a brass crucifix, and gave it to her and said, you know, I know that your father was also a pastor in the same church. He had always wanted to give this crucifix to his son, your brother Jacob, but he passed away, and none of you could find this crucifix. It was somewhere in the house. None of you could find it. Here it is. You give it to Jacob. Isn't it the one that your father had? He said, and gave her this brass crucifix. She was in absolute tears, and she looked at it and she said, yes, this belonged to my father. This belonged to my father. And having said that, Swami materialized another small silver cross and gave it to Mrs. Grant and said, I think when you were 6 or 7 years old, when you went to church, you lost your cross, which had been given to you by your family. Here it is. And he materialized both the crosses to them, blessed them, gave them vibhuti after asking them, if I give you vibhuti, will you take it? And he blessed them and sent them. And those two ladies were just beyond, you cannot even use the word surprise. They just couldn't believe what had happened to them. And after that, of course, many times they would come with us to Vrindavan. And many times Swami would say, it doesn't matter by what name you call that divinity. He will respond when there is intensity in your thoughts and when you call out to him with love. So these were some of the ways that I realized the omnipresence of Swami, that faith and the name had such power to it. So this was one occasion. But a more recent occasion, I must say, you know, all of us, however much we experience his divinity, are always swayed sometimes with these doubts. You know, we don't believe in our own self. In fact, one of the most beautiful spiritual advices that Swami gave all of us during my son's Upanayanam, he told my sons, first and foremost, have faith. And then he said, have self-confidence in your faith. Don't go on moving like a pendulum from place to place, to guru, to God, to God. Have faith and have confidence in your faith, that faith that you have in that Lord is there with you at all times.
ओम जय जगदीश हरे स्वामी सत्य साई हरे भक्त जना संरक्षक भक्त जना संरक्षक पति महेश्वरा ओम जय जगदीश हरे शशिवदना श्रीकरा सर्वा प्राणपते स्वामी सर्वा प्राणपते आश्रित कल्पलतिका आश्रित कल्पलतिका आपदान्धवा ओम जय जगदीश हरे मातपिता गुरुदैवमु मरि अन्तयु नीवे स्वामी मरि अन्तयु नीवे नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नागेन्द्राशयना ओम जय जगदीश हरे ओंकार रूप ओजस्वी हो साई महादेवा सत्य साई महादेवा मंगल आरती अंधुको मंगल आरती अंधुको मंदर गिरिधारी ओम जय जगदीश हरे नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण 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 ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा शांति शांति शान्ति शान्ति समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की जय।